So let's talk about prototyping. So this is something that I normally don't have a lot of time to discuss when I'm doing design thinking sessions or learning, because it's usually something that teams will go off on their own and create a prototype, and we'll come back and we'll discuss it. But because we're talking about tools, I want to share some prototyping tools that you can use, and they'll be available for download as lessons also. But I really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this whole concept of prototyping. There is like an exhaustive list of like prototyping methods that you can use. Um, but some of the more common prototyping methods really let you develop a prototype, right? So create that minimal viable product or something that's not a full product, and allows you to test along the way and get some feedback from your users. So there are four key components that you really need to pay attention to when prototyping and testing, irregardless of what method you decide to use. So the first component is people, right? Because we're talking about design thinking. And so the people you want to include are those who you want to test and those who you want to observe, or be observers of the testing or the prototyping. And then objects. So the objects are like, what are the things, the interactivities, the static things that you're going to include in your prototype and that people will interact with, right? So that's your kind of objects that you'll be doing. And then location. Where is your prototyping going to take place? Like, where's the testing going to take place? And how is that, environment suitable for test for that prototyping and testing? And then interactions. So these are like digital and physical experiences that occur between like the people and the objects that you've included. And so overall, these are really important to building a prototype. And because with prototyping, you're not building a full product, you are building a minimal viable product. So remember that you are creating an MVP. So prototyping doesn't mean that you're creating this one big solution that then you're going to go out and test. A prototype can be a piece of a solution that you are going to test and gather data and feedback from to decide if like you're going down the right path or not. So prototyping can help you actually in the design thinking phase go through those process steps again of the empathize, define, to really figure out and ideate to really figure out like are you like on the right track or not? Was there something that you missed? So I really like building prototypes, and if you guys have been in any of my other sessions, you know that that is my big thing is let's prototype, let's create something that's we can test and try it out with users. So I'm going to share a few prototyping templates or methods that you can use. So I have on my board here. The first one is going to be lo-fi. So a lo-fi, this is an example from one of my cohort students, and she created this lo-fi prototype where she has a problem statement here, and then the proposed solution, and notice the word proposed. And then she wrote out kind of like, what is the journey or what are the steps that this prototype is going to take? This is good enough. What she did, she built a storyboard that outlines the steps that someone would go through when interacting with the prototype. This is a perfectly viable prototype because then you can decide what are the steps that need to change. You can get feedback on this and you can iterate on it. And I really appreciate this type of prototype just because you can get some good feedback. Let me just show you guys the full prototype she built here. So she added a brief, and then the tech challenges here, just using some high level graphics that she found. And she put down the metrics also. So that's another component of your prototype is you need to decide what your success metrics are. What are you going to measure? And what does success look like for the prototype? So I think having those kind of defined out early on is really important. The next type of prototype, let me open my outline here, is this is a fun one. It's called Dark Horse. And every time I present this, a lot of people are really confused about this whole concept of a dark horse. So with a dark horse, this is just a brief explanation. I want to make it bigger on my screen here so you can read through it also. So dark horse is really about taking wild ideas. So think of wild horses, right? And trying to get a deeper understanding of what what the problem is. And with a dark horse, like what you're saying, it's almost like a Trojan horse, right? Where people don't really suspect that you'll be successful with it. But what you want to do is you want to just create a prototype that is based on an outlandish kind of solution that you can then test and iterate on and get feedback on. I'm going to be posting more about this dark horse as a lesson, and you'll be able to dive deeper into them. I'm really interested in hearing your questions. The next one is this prototype to test. And with prototype to test, what you're doing is, again, I've been talking about, building a prototype and then getting feedback, and you'll get access to this template also. But what you're doing is like you're deciding like what ideas you're going to work on for your prototype, and why do you want to build or experiment with a specific prototype. So putting that reasoning in a brief is really helpful. And then how are the users going to interact with your prototype? And then you would use this for like the storyboarding, like what are the steps someone would go through with your prototype. And this can be screenshots, it can just be text where you're writing in, and then some detailing of a scenario. So these here are some basic prototyping. Let me just share a few more with you. Let's see if I can hear. This is a prototypes and feedback. So this is about iterations, right? So you're going to build out your prototype here, and then you are going to iterate on it through each step. So you're going to get feedback, you're going to iterate, you're going to make some changes, you're going to get feedback, iterate, and this is part of prototyping also. You don't have to build the actual prototype. This can be completely sticky notes or just text. Then we have this basic storyboarding. All of you are familiar with storyboarding. Storyboarding is actually a good prototyping tool that you can use for building a prototype. This is a little bit more complex. This is a visual storyboard. It's collaborative. It's meant for multiple people to use it. So you assign like what you have a Kanban board here. So like what do you have to do? You can assign people to it. I'm using Mural. So this is just a template in Mural. And then finally, there's the e-learning storyboard, and I wanted to bring this one in here because a lot of you do design e-learning, and having scripts and screenshots and getting that feedback is another good way to prototype. So a lot of you already prototype when you're building out your solutions. So this whole idea of like sketching and creating interfaces that may be not completely baked out is really interesting, right? There's another type of prototype that I really like. It's called the Wizard of Oz, and I don't have an example of it here. But the Wizard of Oz prototype is basically a faked function prototype. You can build it. My favorite tool to build it in is PowerPoint. So basically you can do like hyperlinking between slides, and it giving the user the illusion of like a machine making the decisions in the background or having something pre-baked. So just a few examples of prototyping. When you prototype, you want to find out like, how are you going to get feedback? What are you going to do with that feedback? What are those timelines? What are those constraints? How are you going to iterate? And then what's your final report on the prototype going to be in order to make a decision to move forward or not with the prototype? So just some basics on prototyping. I will be putting some templates and lessons for you to download, and I hope this was really useful for you. This is something that I don't get a lot of opportunities to share and have help people go through it. Usually I just provide templates and I provide some guidance. With my own teams, I do a ton of prototyping and wireframing, and I think that this is a really important step for you to understand, because it is one of the most valuable steps in design thinking also, along with understanding the user problem or challenge.